Most people don't like going on really long hikes because they don't like being out in the middle of nowhere all alone. When I was younger, though, I couldn't resist that feeling. That's why, when I was 27, I finally got to go through with one of my biggest goals in life, which was to hike a portion of the Appalachian Trail. I lived in Vermont at the time and decided to spend a week hiking and camping along the section of the trail that ran through the state. It felt like it was going to be one of the most peaceful moments of my life, but it's crazy how quickly that can all change. My first 4 days on the trail were amazing. I was walking at an admittedly slow pace as I took in everything around me, and I made a lot of stops along the way. But on that fourth night in the wilderness, and without any other hiker in sight, I started to get this odd sinking feeling. I set up my tent and laid down for the night, and for some reason, I just couldn't shake it off. I knew that something was about to go wrong for me. I just didn't know what. That feeling kept me up for a while that night, but eventually the sounds of nature around me lulled me to sleep. I tossed and turned in my tent until I heard the sound of something moving around outside my campsite. I wasn't alarmed at first. I'd had deer and other animals investigate my camp while I was sleeping on the trail before, and they were all harmless. This was different, though. I continued to lay in my sleeping bag, waiting for whatever it was outside of my tent to just pass by. But instead of walking through the campsite, it was as if they stopped right outside of my tent. I stayed as silent as I could and listened, hoping it would just walk away. But that was when they spoke. "What do you think they're doing here?" a voice said. My eyes widened as I realized someone was standing right over my tent. Another voice responded to the first one. "Come on, man, it's probably just one of those hikers." I closed my eyes in fear, not knowing what was about to happen. The first man spoke again. "This far from the trail?" he asked. "I doubt it. Something's not right about this." I held my breath as the person closest to my tent started walking around it a little more. It was as if they were looking for the entrance, but without flashlights were clearly having a hard time seeing. I looked around my tent, and as quietly as I could, I reached into the bag that was right next to me. I pulled out my flashlight and the can of bear mace that I brought with me. My hands started to get a little shaky as I realized that the person outside of my tent had found the zipper and was getting ready to open it. I took in a deep breath as the entrance flap to the tent opened up, and without hesitating, I turned on my flashlight. When the light came on, I could see a dirt-covered man leaning into my tent. The bright light on his face caused him to freeze for a minute and gave me a chance to point the mace at him and spray. He screamed as he fell backward out of my tent, and I followed as fast as I could. I rushed out of the tent and began running in the direction that I was pretty sure would lead me to the trail that I was on earlier that day. I heard the man screaming behind me, but after a few seconds, the screams of pain turned into screams of anger. "I'm going to get you!" he yelled from a distance. I looked back over my shoulder, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness behind me. I ran for what felt like hours, and by the time that daylight was finally breaking through the tree line, I could hear the sound of wheels on pavement. I had reached the road. I walked out onto the street and tried to get someone to pull over and help me, but understandably, nobody wanted to stop for a man in his pajamas and covered in dirt and twigs. It took me another hour or so to walk to the nearest town, but when I did, I flagged down the first police officer that I could find and explained to them what happened. They assured me that they would look into the portion of the trail I was on, and when I asked them what those guys were doing up there, they explained that sometimes they get people doing illegal activities in the mountains. Anything from growing marijuana to cooking harder drugs, the trees provide them with cover. The officers suspect that I happened to make my camp too close to someone's illicit activities, and they said it was good that I made it down from the mountain safely. One of the most interesting places that I ever lived was when I worked as a ranch hand on a large farm in northwest Montana. I only got to work there for about 2 months though, before the family that bought it decided to sell the land after some strange things happened. The family had a few other ranch hands along with myself move onto the property about a month before them so that they can make sure the place was all set up before they arrived. That first night there though, one of the workers quit after they went outside for a smoke and came back in saying that they heard someone talking outside. He was really freaked out by it, and by noon the next day, he was on his way to a different farm in the area. We all thought he was crazy and just went about our business, but by the end of the first day, I think each one of us felt like there was something weird going on at the ranch. It was around 7 at night, and we were all watching some TV and eating a late meal when we heard something making the horses go crazy in their stables. We all went to check it out, but when we got there, they had all calmed down and there was nothing in sight. We checked each of the stalls for any sign of snakes or other animals that could hurt the horses, but there was nothing. We walked back to the house that we all slept in, and as we made our way around the corner, another worker and I both noticed that the front door was open. Then, out of nowhere, a raggedy-looking man came running out of the front door and booked it off the porch. I called out to him, and me and the other workers quickly started chasing him. We had him in our line of sight until he ran around the barn, and by the time we made it around the corner ourselves, he was nowhere in sight. And it was too dark to keep chasing him around, so we decided to go back to the house and just keep watch in case he came back. The next morning, I stepped out into the morning fog and looked over toward the barns across the way, and through the fog, I could swear that I saw a silhouette of someone standing. It was like they were staring right back at me before they turned and walked away. Once some of the other workers came outside, I told them what I saw, and one of them actually said that he saw the same thing the morning before. All of us were really curious about whatever it was, but we didn't have time to look into it. The next few weeks went by, and the only strange incidents that we noticed were the shadows in the morning fog, but eventually, we just tossed that up to being the trees and the lighting. Time came for the new owners to arrive, and when they showed up, we showed them all the ins and outs of the place before letting them get all settled. That night, I was sitting on the front porch enjoying a drink before getting ready to sleep when out of nowhere, we heard a loud scream coming from the main house. I went running up the hill as fast as I could, and as I made it about halfway up, I noticed what looked like the same raggedy man from a few weeks ago running away from the house. I chased after him, but again, he managed to get around the same barn and disappear. I looked around for any possible place he could be hiding, but I couldn't find anyone. By the time I returned to the main house, the owner was outside looking around as well. Apparently, he was asleep in the living room when his wife heard someone inside the house and screamed. I told him all of the things that had happened since we started working on the ranch, and he just passed it off as if it was nothing. That next morning, though, his mind sure changed. As always, I went outside with my cup of coffee and looked around the morning fog to see if there were any shadows. But as soon as I made it out the door, I called for the other workers. I couldn't take another step forward as I looked out into the fog and saw what looked like at least 10 different people's shadows standing in the field looking up toward the houses. Just as I was about to ask if we should go up to the main house, I heard the phone in our house ringing. I went inside and answered, only to have the owner ask me who was in the fields. I told him that those were the things that we had been seeing the past couple of weeks, and he said that they were outside of the main house too. It was that same phone call that the owner explained that he and his wife were considering selling the ranch because it was too busy for them. But if you ask me, they were just afraid of the unknown, and I don't blame them. Everyone there was having trouble getting a good night's sleep since we started there, and after moving away, I can say that I never experienced anything like that again. Sometimes I still find myself wondering what those shadows were, or who that man was. But there are some things that I guess we'll just never find out. A few years ago, when I was 21, I was driving back home from the music festival at Bonnaroo, which was about 9 hours away from my house. I planned on driving all throughout the night, and since most of the drive was through the middle of nowhere, I figured that it would be a safe trip and I would be home in no time. What I didn't take into account was the fact that if my car broke down, I would be helpless. As luck would have it, I was about 3 hours into my drive when I heard the sputtering sound of my engine as my car outright shut down on the highway. I managed to pull to the side of the road, but once the car was off, there wasn't much else I could do. To make things worse, without streetlights and with how empty the road was, it was basically pitch black. I couldn't see a thing to my left or my right, so all I could do was hope that my phone had enough service to call a tow truck. I got a hold of a local company that said they could get to me within the hour, so even though I wasn't comfortable, I just tried my best to chill and wait. That proved easier said than done though, as I looked out the driver's side window and noticed something strange in the darkness. It was faint, but it looked like there was some sort of faint flickering light out in the middle of the field across the street from my car. I tried to make out exactly what was causing the light, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't tell. That was when I noticed that the light was moving around. It was almost like it was swaying from side to side. Suddenly, I felt the hair on my neck stand up and a chill ran down my body. I don't know why, but it was as if I started to panic. My eyes remained fixated on the light as it swayed side to side, and it took me a few seconds to realize that whatever it was getting closer to my car. My eyes widened as I realized that there was something behind the light, as if something was carrying it. I immediately started thinking about all of those scary movies that I used to watch, and then there was no stopping the panic from setting in. I looked around, but all I could see was darkness outside of the car, so I did the only thing I could think of as the faint flickering light continued to get closer. I tried to start my car. To my surprise, and after a short struggle, the car started up, and I didn't waste time as I threw it into drive and began heading down the highway as fast as I could. My car made it about a mile before I heard the sound of the sputtering engine again, and I was forced to pull over. By that point, about 45 minutes had passed, and I got a message from the towing company that the driver was almost to my location. It took them a little extra time to find me because I moved a bit, but once they did, I explained what happened, expecting them to call me crazy. But the tow truck driver said that he had lived in that area for years, and apparently there's an old cemetery back the way that I came from. He told me that people see all sorts of things there, and for some reason, at least once a month, he has to tow someone out of that spot because their car mysteriously shut down. Once my car was all hooked up, we both got into his truck and he was very cool about driving me to a nearby motel where I stayed the night while they worked on my car. I ended up not getting out of there until 5 in the afternoon the next day, but the car was all fixed up and I didn't have any problems the rest of the trip. I will say that now I get nervous anytime I pass a cemetery though, because I still can't explain the light that I saw, or whatever it was that was carrying it.